political leaders are not held responsible for their actions, democracy is at risk. Tonight, Special Assignment examines government's commitment to accountability.
It's 7 o'clock on Tuesday, the 12th of September. You're listening to AM Live on SAFM 104 to 107, making news headlines.
The ANC in the Western Cape says Premier Gerald Morkel has failed the people of the province by not leading by example. The party was reacting to the forced...
Order, comrades. Comrades, the President.
There are many instances in Africa and elsewhere in the world which show what happens when, on becoming a ruling party, a genuinely popular national liberation movement such as ours loses contact with the people and its leaders transform themselves into a self-serving ruling elite.
Accountability is a cornerstone of democracy. Watchdog bodies like Parliament and the Public Protector are there to hold those in high office accountable for their actions. But they only work if government itself displays commitment to enforce their decisions. Sometimes the system works. Without political will, it doesn't.
We challenge the industry to come up with a forum that will work for broadcasting. Mr. de Klerk.
And the announcement which we make today is indeed a great step forward in broadcasting in South Africa.
The Independent Broadcasting Authority was set up to promote democracy by opening the airwaves that were once dominated by the state broadcaster.
It led to the opening up of the airwaves to new commercial radio entrepreneurs.
To do that, the integrity of IBA councillors had to be above reproach.
Focusing on the information society and development.
When people get appointed to bodies like the IBA, they are appointed on the basis of their understanding of what IBA is supposed to do, but most of all on the basis of integrity. You're talking about people who are well educated and respected in society.
It's difficult, to describe exactly how a thing like that goes wrong, but I think with the appointment of the IBA, they had no administrative capacity and no experience of administration. And the administration started going wrong.
And we started seeing some practices and things that's happening that's way beyond the normal public sector sort of practice. And the kinds of explanations that we were starting to get for those things were not satisfactory.
By year 3, we'd become alarmed. And we wrote quite a strong recommendation, which we had tabled with Parliament, on asking them to get their act together.
But when they didn't, the Auditor General was brought in to do a special investigation. Henry Kluwer presented his report to Parliament. It documented a series of very serious problems in the IBA's financial affairs.
The Parliamentary Public Accounts Committee has called on the Public Protector to investigate whether anyone should be prosecuted for financial mismanagement within the Independent Broadcasting Authority.
The idea of the democratic system is to optimize the spending of the taxpayers' money. And, well, he misused public money. And that's basically a crime.
From the role that IB has got to play as a role model, and you've got people within that institution, even if it's 500 Rand, it's not the value that's important, it's the principle that's important.
Even if we are in a society in transition, these are things that just shouldn't happen, because we're not talking of ignorance on rules and regulations, which simple, common sense things that people shouldn't do.
I don't believe that the inference of the Auditor General is that we can't be trusted with money. I don't believe the instant inference is that we've been abusing money. I think what he's saying to us is that we haven't had the necessary controls, the management procedures and systems.
We acknowledge that we have not paid as much attention to administrative matters.
And that's the kind of thing that people have to understand, that if there's no policy, you have a responsibility to be accountable, to do the right thing, and so on. And this wasn't done in this particular case.
The scandal caused lasting damage to the organization's integrity, so much so that it soon became difficult for the IBA to fulfill its function.
I think we had, at that point, gathered enough evidence to show that not only at the general level were they incompetent and not delivering against the responsibilities that had been given to them as councillors, that they weren't running the IBA and especially its financial affairs in the way that they were supposed to. The dishonesty at the individual and personal level of particular councillors, I think, came into sharp focus.
The very next day, the 3 councillors resigned.
So that is a statement we'd like to make to you.
As a councillor, I take full responsibility for everything that relates to the running of the organisation.
Lindol Shopemafole was appointed as ministerial advisor less than 6 months later. Today, she's the minister's representative at South Africa's embassy in France.
I take responsibility for the fact that in terms of the management of the organization, things didn't go well.
Just after her resignation, Dr. Sibiletso Mokone-Matabane was appointed as a consultant to the government-owned company Santec. Today, she's the acting managing director.
As a councillor, I must take responsibility, because that's the way it happened.
Peter de Klerk still works as an advisor to the minister, an appointment made soon after his resignation. At a press conference 3 years later, the minister publicly exonerated all 3 councillors.
Now behind us is very important. I look forward to their continued contribution in the communications industry.
At the end of the day, they weren't accountable for the generally poor way in which they managed the IBA.
Our investigations usually end at the findings and recommendation stage. Then we take it back to the official or the department concerned for implementation.
Despite all the recommendations, the Heath unit cleared the councillors on charges of corruption on a technicality. There had been no policies in place preventing the use of IBA credit cards for personal expenses.
Corruption doesn't get fought only when you arrest somebody or when you make a finding against somebody in a commission of inquiry. Corruption is in the acts that you do, the messages that you are sending.
Virtually from the day of his appointment as Mpumalanga's Safety and Security MEC, Steve Mabona was controversial. But allegations of corruption could never be pinned down until a scandal broke around the fraudulent issuing of traffic licenses.
People were found to have been given licenses without once getting into a vehicle, without sitting down doing their test. In fact, one of the people who had been given a license was found not to even know how to identify a steering wheel in a vehicle.
John Muller was the traffic cop in Mabona's department who brought the scandal to Arnstein's attention.
We found out that they had just stopped my salary because Frida went to draw some money and there was no money in the bank. In November, I don't know what, 96 I think it was. And then we made inquiries and nobody could tell me what is the story. And it went on like that for 8 months.
John Miller is a rather outspoken, very opinionated traffic cop in Mpumalanga, with very clear ideas of his own of what is right and what is wrong. He clashed repeatedly with the senior management on issues that he felt were incorrect.
I used to ask him, just be quiet, you know, you've got children growing up. You need the job because I wasn't working at the time. And he used to just tell me, I can't forsake my morals. I can't overlook these things.
A judicial inquiry was launched into the extent of fraud and corruption in Mabona's department.
We listened to quite a lot of witnesses, and then there were strong evidence pointing to the involvement of Mr. Mabona.
We had traffic officers making confessions, yes, I'm guilty of nepotism, yes, I'm guilty of corruption. And yes, my superiors knew about it and failed to act about it.
Some people made, for the 2 months that I confiscated licenses in Mpumalanga, I worked out they made an average of 2 million rand a month selling driver's licenses. Actually, Moldenheimer himself congratulated me and he said, "You're a very brave man to bring this out, because everything you're going to lose now."
The finding of the commission was that Mr. Maduna, as the political head of the Department of Safety and Security in Mpumalanga, did not do his job properly. There was a lot of lack of control in the department, and we also found that he was aware of the lack of proper control.
Maduna was found or was recommended to be removed from office urgently because he was found not to be fit for a position of public authority.
There was a recommendation that says, I have failed to run the department and stop corruption. That's what Moldenhauer said. But I said, this man, where does it come from? Because all the things I told them I did, even document, it was not even in the whole report of 635 pages.
The commission report, this is the report over here, it's quite bulky, simply verified what was already known at that stage.
I never respected that report, and I will never respect it.
Before the findings of the commission were even made public, Maduna resigned. But he remained a backbencher in the provincial legislature. After the 1999 election, when a new premier took over, Maduna was reappointed as MEC for Safety and Security.
It is indeed the Premier's constitutional prerogative to appoint this cabinet, even without consulting a single soul in this country. I think that message should be very clear to us all.
I mean, everybody, it seems to me, the Justin Arnst and everybody, they are trying to blame me.
Maduna was one of the more difficult people to investigate because people are truly physically afraid of the man. He's a very outspoken person, very loud and very in your face, and he's not averse to making public threats.
I've never threatened anybody in my whole life.
The fact is that this is a man in a position of authority, a man in a position of public trust, and he appears to have violated that public trust.
Maduna was even assigned an additional portfolio, that of public works. Merla's life has been destroyed.
You know, our parents are having it so hard.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It will come. Like we always saying, it will come.
Like you always say.
My job was to investigate. I investigated. Where did it get me?
I think it's an incredibly bad example to other officials. I mean, what are we basically saying to the public? Yes, do something wrong. If you get caught, we'll demote you. We won't fire you. We'll demote you. You continue earning a salary. And we'll keep quiet until we think people have forgotten, and then you're back in office. In fact, more powerful than before.
We all have a responsibility towards each other. And my responsibility is towards the motorist. And if I can make the road safer for the motorist, then I'll gladly do it again tomorrow.
On the 11th of May, 1994, IFP President Mangosuthu Buthelezi was appointed Minister of Home Affairs in the Government of National Unity. Straight after the country's first democratic election, relations between the ANC government and the IFP were delicately balanced. On the 22nd of December 1998, in his hometown Ulundi, Buthelezi walked into the First National Bank carrying checkers bags stuffed with money.
First found out about it when someone from First National Bank in Ulundi phoned me to say that a friend of his had been present at First National Bank when the Minister of Home Affairs asked to see the bank manager, was led into the bank manager's office, and explained that in exchange for what he had in the checkers packets, he wanted a cheque for R1 million, a bank cheque. When the minister emptied the cash all over the desk, the guy realized that you were talking a fairly serious sum of money, and called a number of people to help him count this cash out. It took some time. I understand it took well over an hour or so to count this money out. The total was a little over 2.5 million rand. That money was separated out. 1 million rand was given to the bank, who in exchange for that cash gave out a bank cheque. The rest was put back into the checkers' packets, and the Minister of Home Affairs walked out.
On the 3rd of March this year, Kirk published an article detailing these events.
What happened after the article was published?
Absolutely nothing. There was no investigation. Yeah, this is a senior Minister of State, the Minister of Home Affairs, walking around with checkers packets full of 50 and 100 rand notes.
Buthelezi said the money had been raised for the second general election and that he strongly rejected any suggestion of impropriety. But why did the minister convert the cash into a cheque before depositing it into the IFP account?
I would try and find an explanation as to why that trend. And there's always sometimes good reasons, practical reasons as to why someone does that.
Questions remain, but who should ask them? When approached for comment, First National Bank declined, citing client confidentiality.
There is a requirement currently with the bank where if they do find any transaction that looks suspicious, that's material, etc., they have a duty to look into that firstly and to report. Now, who they're going to report it to, I'm not sure.
Who should investigate it, I don't know. The matter wasn't reported to the police. I established that. So certainly First National Bank never thought that there was a crime committed there.
It's just a matter, as far as I'm concerned, that would raise the eyebrow, but unfortunately a matter which I can't do much about.
The fact is, the public protector does not have the right to ask questions because it wasn't public money. But as a government minister, is Buthelezi not accountable to the public? Do we not have a right to know why a minister has 2.5 million rands cash in checkers bags? When approached for comment, Buthelezi declined. He said even after 6 months, he might still take legal action against Kirk.
He wouldn't be the first person to brazen out a scandal, especially not in this province.
Penrel Maduna returned from exile in 1990. A constitutional expert himself, he became a key player in writing South Africa's new constitution.
We have to go back to negotiations, but those must be very serious negotiations aimed at democratizing this country.
Later, he was appointed as Minister for Mineral and Energy Affairs. As the first ANC minister in this department, Maduna had to transform this controversial institution. He suspected irregularities in the Strategic Fuel Fund, the sanction-busting government-owned company that buys and sells oil. Convinced that there was corruption, Maduna launched his own inquiry.
An oil company involved in sanctions busting, there was always, there's always something a journalist would want to look at. And the fact that the minister was interested in finding something, I was, fascinated to pursue it.
As a prominent watchdog body, it's crucial that the Auditor General's office is above reproach. They were responsible for auditing the fuel fund's books and detecting possible irregularities.
There's no possibility of any irregularities. We even did inspections of oil stockpiles.
After several months went by, nothing happened. The story started to shift towards, whether or not this wasn't a witch hunt. And, we wrote a few stories suggesting that perhaps there wasn't sufficient evidence to warrant this investigation that the minister had launched.
Placed under pressure by these press reports, but without sufficient evidence, the minister exploded in Parliament. He accused Henry Kluwer of covering up the theft of 170 million rand.
Yeah, the phrase was, the Auditor General will have to explain, how 170 million rands worth of oil went up in smoke. That was the phrase he used. And obviously now we know that he was confusing the difference between a real loss and an accounting loss. He'd stumbled upon a piece of paper that one of his investigators had given him, which had referred to a loss of 170 million rand, and was actually referring to an accounting loss.
The unfortunate part is that during the course of doing his job, he lapsed at one point in allowing himself to go public on something that he was not understanding properly, and which impacted rather negatively on the Auditor General's office.
It cost the office in excess of 6.5 million rand to defend that statement.
For me, the integrity of the office of the Auditor General is uppermost. I won't deliberately go out to undermine it, but I shall never cease asking questions when a particular situation I find myself in as minister begs questions. I might be wrong. And if I am wrong, I will accept it.
For a member of the executive to attack the Auditor General is also, it's not acceptable from a democratic point of view.
He not only engaged the Auditor General's office in a speech or speeches he made in Parliament, but I mean even in a press conference, you know, and didn't go to the institution as the Constitution directs.
Well, he never asked us to explain. I don't know who he asked.
If he'd done what any normal person would have done, to say, please explain it to me so I understand it, we would have saved him all this embarrassment, the government all the embarrassment.
The matter was referred to a committee that found that Maduna had in fact transgressed the rules of Parliament.
Instead of standing up in Parliament, apologising and withdrawing, what he did was to exercise his right to have senior counsel and junior counsel appear on his behalf. And this went on for a year.
The matter was also referred to the public protector. He was asked to make a finding on whether the minister had acted unconstitutionally.
The Auditor General is one of the institutions which is pretty well protected by the Constitution, a section of the Constitution which protects those kind of independent watchdog institutions from attack by other organs of government.
At the height of the crisis, with the public protector's findings still pending, Maduna was appointed Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development.
Well, I made a finding that in that regard he had acted unconstitutionally, not following the prescripts of Section 41.
Anybody who holds public office must surely hold the Constitution dear, and that's not what happened in this case.
All I'm saying is that if we are dealing with the supreme law of the land, then we must show that we respect it.
What government is left grappling with is a Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development found to have acted unconstitutionally.
The Bakwa report makes it quite clear that apart from a few minor accounting anomalies, in fact, Kluwer, comes out pretty spotless, and the oil company, amazing, the state oil company under apartheid, comes out clean.
A few days into the Bakwa inquiry, Maduna actually admitted that he had made a mistake, but there was no turning back. His allegations against the Auditor General had been so serious and cast such doubt on the integrity of the office that the investigation had to run its course. It was a simple mistake, but a very costly one. The investigation lasted a year and cost around 30 million rand in legal fees.
Hey, that's a lot of money. It can build a lot of clinics and buy a lot of school books.
Whichever way, wherever you look at it, at the end of the day, it's going to come out of the pockets of the taxpayer, whether it's my cost, the 6.5, or whatever the total process has cost coming out of SFF, it's going to come out of the coffers of the taxpayer.
The public protector can only make findings, so the matter was referred to a parliamentary committee under the chairmanship of Andries Nel. The committee had to recommend a suitable sanction. Its judgment was supposed to be quick, but months later it is still pending.
It is within or on the table of this Honourable Committee of Parliament to ensure that there are sanctions that are attached to the provisions of the Constitution, because if that doesn't happen, the Constitution is not worth, with respect, the paper is written on.
It would, I want to say, and be an abuse of that institution to censor a person who says, but look at the problems.
When a minister, or anybody for that matter, errs, there should be a consequence.
That's why we're hopeful that the Nell Commission doesn't in any way downplay the Public Protector's findings and report.
We've called for resignation several times in editorials. The newspaper has.
Yes, I think there should at least be a very public reprimand from the President.
And the main thing you're supposed to do as a minister is to exercise judgment and take advice properly, and he hasn't quite done that.
Yes, that is strange, isn't it?
It has been said, even during the former president's time, Mandela, that we need an RDP of the soul. That's a reference to the moral regime that we're trying to establish in this country. The sooner our political leaders also realize that, with regard to good governance, but with regard also to how we want to grow our children, the sooner they realize that, the better.
Join us again next week for another special assignment. And if you have any comments or suggestions, you can email them to truth@sabc.co.za.